Great, that notification came through. Perfect.
Perfect.
Oh, good. Just about 1 minute away here. Oh, great. I think I just saw the notification that it's opened up.
Yes.
Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in. We're going to start in about 15 or 20 seconds here. I want to start right on time and make sure that we finish on time so that you can get back to your Tuesday, which I know you're having a great one. Hi, everyone. My name is Duncan Gilman. I'm the Dean of Students for Splash Media U, which is a social media training program geared toward businesses and enabling them to use social media marketing better to promote themselves and their businesses. We're so happy to be able to present a webinar every month, and we've had some great topics so far. Today is one that I hope you'll find useful. It's about how to turn the comments and feedback online into positive experiences for your consumers and for your potential customers too. Hopefully what you're getting is a nice mix of comments for your business if you're on social media. Of course, one thing to point out is whether you are controlling that site or not, people are going to be talking about you on social media. So part of the game is just realizing that and starting those platforms so that you can be in control, have some say in those conversations that are happening about you, whether you know it or not. Anyway, but today we're going to specifically talk about addressing both positive and negative feedback and turning those into great marketing opportunities. With me on the line, Julio, if you want to say hi. Julio Lebron is on our campus in Orlando.
Hello, everyone. Yes, I'm here in Orlando, Florida, joining all of you.
Thanks,
See,
Julio. So what Julio's going to do, we'll go ahead and go to the next screen here. Julio is going to be moderating, helping me moderate the chat window. And if you haven't opened the chat window yet, you should speech bubble as part of join.me. You can open that up. So he's going to help me moderate, and he's also going to be tweeting some of the poll questions we used today out on Twitter as well. So you can certainly feel free to correspond via Twitter or right here in the chat box. And I've got the chat window open as well, so I can see your comments come in. Regarding those polls, what we're going to do is label them Q1, Q2, Q3. And if you would, when you type in your answer either on Twitter or on the chat screen here, if you would use A1, A2, A3, so we know which question your answer is referring to, that would be very helpful. The part of this is about having interaction with you, so we'd love to get your response. And if you have a question that goes beyond our time today, or you think of something after the fact, please feel free to tweet that after the fact. We'd love to talk with you, continue the conversation even after we're done today. The things we're going to talk about today include creating an actual response policy, basically a workflow so that your whole team knows how to address customer issues. And one of the most important things you can learn how to do is address those issues when they come in on the same platform. For example, if I tweet to a bakery saying I was unhappy with my order, I'm not expecting the bakery to give me a call back. If I tweet them, I want them to tweet me back. That's the mode of communication that I've initiated, and I expect that in return. And there's some easy ways to do that, and I'll show you some examples of how companies are doing that. Another important thing to do, number 3 there, is to proactively reach out and address these issues before they become problems. Imagine if you could listen to what's going on in your industry and specifically in your business and pinpoint these customer issues before they blow up in your face and you have to address them after the fact. And then finally, I'm actually going to sort of combine number 4 and 5. We're going to talk about some ways to foster that open communication. So encourage your clients, your customers, customers to talk back with you and leave you feedback, and then some ways to improve the ROI of that feedback. So yes, you're encouraging your customers to be in touch and keep the communication lines open. But how can you make that pay off for your business? So we're going to sort of combine those four at the bottom. And anytime as we go through, if you think of a question, feel free to go ahead and type it in either on Twitter or preferably right here in the chat screen so that I can see it. And then when we get to the question period at the end, it'll be there ready to go. So let's get started with that first item we're going to talk about. How do you create a policy, a workable workflow, so to speak, so that everyone on your team knows how to address certain customer issues? I'm going to turn that into a question for you with our first poll, speaking of the polls. So question one for you is, how do you currently handle online reviews, whether they're positive or negative? And Julio, as you see, is typing those into the chat room as well, so you can answer them right there. Feel free to go ahead and use, you'll notice the chat window has a little drop-down box that says at all or at an individual user. We would love to see your comments. I'm sure the other attendees here would love to see comments and questions, especially if they have the same question. So feel free to keep it on the all, unless you have a private issue you need to share, and then you can just use the at Julio and let him know about an issue with the webinar here. So we'll wait another minute. You don't have to type it in right now. Feel free to type it in as we go. But again, the first question is, what are you currently doing to handle these especially negative responses? But feel free to include ways you address positive comments and feedback as well. We'll go ahead and move on, and you can feel free to put your answer in there. But I'm going to show you some ways to craft your response policy. This is a working, living document that you use through your team so that everybody, not just the marketing department, here's where it's very important, not just the marketing, but especially in customer service, especially in sales, if you have those departments, everybody needs to be on the same page when it comes to dealing with potential and current customers and their issues, not just your customer service rep, not just your sales rep. And here are the things that need to go into that response policy. First and foremost, you need to have a working list of the platforms that you're engaged in. Now, of course, there are some instances where maybe you haven't claimed your Yelp page yet, or maybe there's a site that you're not using, but some people are commenting about you there. So it's important to include those as well. So I would divide it into two categories. Maybe have a list of the platforms where you are active, if you have a Facebook page, if you have a Twitter account, if you have a YouTube channel, and then have a growing list that you can add to of sites where you're not necessarily active, but it's still possible that people are talking about you there. People may be talking about you on Snapchat. People may be taking photos of your products and location on Instagram. Even if you don't have a presence there, it's important to know that people are talking about you there. So I would create a list of platforms where you're active, where you're not, so that you can continually monitor these and have a place for them in your workflow. The next thing to keep in mind for developing this response policy is who is responsible for each type of feedback. So if you get a complaint for a particular product, who is ultimately responsible for resolving that issue? If you get a positive comment that you could potentially use as a testimonial on your website, who is responsible for seeing that comment from the initial message itself all the way through to posting on your website as a testimonial? So it's important to define each of those roles. The next thing to do right after you define those roles is to come up with a list of responses for each of those people. So if your salesperson or sales team is going to have certain responses for potential customers, marketing team may have responses for your B2B clients, your customer service people, and I'm using these as examples. It may not be quite that big, but your customer service people have specific responses for people who have issues today with your products and services. Come up with the most common issues that your customers are facing and develop a list of canned responses. Now, not to sound like a robot, not to sound automated, but to save you time. Once you have the individual roles assigned, who is handling what, it's important to give those individuals who are handling all the responses as many tools and as much speed and efficiency as possible. Does that make sense? What I'm suggesting is, if you have someone who handles you do software as a service, and you have someone on your team who handles all the issues about installing the software. Maybe it's not cloud-based, maybe people actually have to install it. And there's one particular issue that with an upgrade, a lot of your users are facing. Develop a canned response so that you can quickly and efficiently get the response out there and let people know there's a patch in the works and we're working to solve it. Please hang tight. Something like that. So develop these canned responses, and then when you keep that conversation going to resolve the issue, then you can interact one-on-one. But this will save you time and create a much more efficient workflow. Once you have the list of where people are, the list of who is going to be taking care of these issues and driving these responses, what the responses are going to be, have a process for escalation if you need it, because you don't want to be stuck in a situation where there's a real issue, they want a refund, they want to cancel, you've caught them right on the edge of telling all their friends, whatever you do, do not do business with these people. You want to have an escalation process in the works so that you know how to take that customer issue all the way to follow it through all the way to the CEO. You need to know, it may not be the CEO, it may not be the CMO, but you need to know where it's going to go. What is the ultimate resolution if it has to be a major company issue, or something the company itself, the CEO or whoever on that top level has to resolve. Have that process in place so that when the CEO gets that issue, she knows, okay, this is a real issue and we need to devote our resources to it. So have that workflow in place. So I'm going to show you that visual workflow in a second here. That's the last component, is putting all this together into that visualization. And here's what a sample might look like. This is the one that we share with our students at Splash Media U for their businesses, and yours may look a little different. This is the basic idea for what your workflow could show in terms of where the issue is routed. And here's what I mean. So right here at the top, let me take out my handy dandy illustration tool. This is where the message comes in, okay? So and right away, it doesn't have to be negative. We're talking about positive comments here. But this is where you address, is the comment positive or negative? If it is positive, you may not even need to respond. You don't have to respond. You could just click like. If it's a Facebook post, you could just say thanks. It may require very minimal on your. If you do respond, possibly use it for a testimonial down the road, you can route it that way as well. You can respond and share with your other customers, or you can simply, this is a more elaborate version of the thank you can thank the person here. On the negative side, I may have to move my chat window over a little bit here so I can see it as well. On the negative side, it's a little bit more complicated, as you can imagine, because there's several types of negative feedback that you might receive. So the first thing you need to do is evaluate the purpose of the comment. Do you have a legitimately unhappy customer? Is your customer legitimately complaining about something that is actually wrong? If they are, then you can go through these different paths to resolve it. If they're not, then you may need to take separate actions. That could include blocking the user, reporting the user if it's abusive. There are all the social media platforms have ways, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, they all have ways to report a user who is creating abusive content, abusive feedback on the site, and then you can let you don't have to route it through your channels, you can let the platform route it through theirs. Facebook handle it on their end. But that's the thing to decide here. What is the purpose? And if it's a legitimate complaint, and I will guess that most of them are. Most of these are actual customer issues that are valuable to you to address publicly, to address them here and let the rest of your customer base know that you're on top of it, that you're handling that issue and you're ready to address it, resolve it, whatever you need to do. And then you can take it offline if you need to. So let me phrase that another way. So someone comes, I used the example of a bakery before. Someone comes into the bakery very unhappy with their order. If that initial comment back from you on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, wherever it may be, if the initial comment back from you is, I'm so sorry to hear that, we're going to work to fix that, I'm sending you a coupon, whatever your personalized response is, if that initial response by you is public, then who knows how many potential other fans, customers, prospective customers will see that message. If you choose to either A, ignore it, or B, not as bad as ignoring, but address it initially privately, the rest of your customer base doesn't necessarily see that and doesn't know that your customer service is as good as it is. Even if you do have great customer service, it's all behind the curtain and no one can see it publicly. So great to be able to use this workflow or something similar for yourself and know, again, about which party is going to address the comment, how to address it, and keep it on that public channel, and then take it offline if you need to. I went to click and I made dots because I didn't take my annotations away. There we go. So I'll just decorate the screen with some dots. We'll spend the last 5 minutes just drawing. We'll have a little drawing party, coloring party, since coloring is the big thing now. So here's some examples. I wanted to show you some examples of a business doing a great job of clearly routing those issues and some different types of responses according to the different types of negative comments that we saw in that workflow chart. So here's one, Southwest Airlines. If you're ever looking for great examples of how businesses handle customer service issues, Southwest Airlines is a great one to point to. Maybe you yourself have had an issue that you've shared with customer service on Southwest, and you've gotten a nice response like these customers have. So Molly says, we are sweltering at gate B5, plane delay, can get some air. And one thing I want to point out, not only is the response here publicly so that it's in plain view, and these are all, let me just clarify, these are all public customer issues. I have no access to Southwest Airlines, so I didn't pull these from some private place. These are all public. That's why I haven't blurred any names or anything. These are public questions. But Southwest Airlines has addressed them publicly so that other customers, again, can see the customer service here. So they've addressed it publicly, and you'll notice, let me drag out my annotation tool again, in a fairly reasonable time. I mean, Southwest has thousands, millions of flyers here, so it may be difficult for them to catch everything, but it's a fairly reasonable amount of time. So this was 3 hours from the time I took a screenshot of it, and their response was an hour later. So, you know, an hour is a long time to sit on a hot plane, but when you think of the scope of how many issues they have to address and resolve, that's fairly reasonable. I want to point out something else here. I want to point out that the comment, the feedback, or I should say the response to the feedback, was personally signed by a particular customer service representative, by Shannon. This is crucial. It may not seem like much. These are what, 8 characters including the dash. It doesn't seem like much, but adding that personal touch shows Molly that there's a person attached. Okay, I know that Shannon's got my back. That means a lot to this customer, especially if you're sweltering on the plane, just sitting there, you're just looking for some relief. You know that Shannon is working on the issue for you. Even if she's not, Shannon's not directly in charge of getting the plane up in the air, she is responding to let you know, because she's in touch with whoever is, she's responding to let Molly know that help is on the way. So a great example. So again, this is an example of a particular type that we saw in the workflow. This is the negative comment that is legitimate. So let's take a look at another example here. Take off my annotations so we can move forward. Now, so here's an example. Now, this is an example of not any sort of a troll post, not a negative post just to complain, but it is an example of a complaint that is incorrect. So great job by Southwest addressing these as well. And I'll show you what I mean here. So Samantha writes, I love flying Southwest, but at some point they need to check the carrying bags. So tired of people with huge bags. You need to charge for carry-ons, not checked. That would get people going. So this is a slight correction on Southwest's part. They wrote back, Samantha, we offer 2 free bags to encourage people to check them and let us do the lifting. So they're politely correcting her feedback by saying, well, actually, our check bags are free. We are trying to encourage people to check their bags, doing everything we can do to get people to check them and not carry them on. So a polite correction here. And again, love the way this was, as you can tell, within a relatively same time period here. Shannon was the same customer service rep. But again, signing that to make it personal and addressing the issues, even when they're not necessarily complaints that can be resolved, but issues that can be addressed. Let's take a look at one more here. and then we'll get to another poll question shortly. So here's one that's a little bit more involved, and the reason I included this one was to show you the back and forth, a great example of handling a customer service issue right there on the platform rather than trying to take it through a phone number or email address, because Robert Baker doesn't want to do that. The reason Robert Baker posted this on Facebook is because he doesn't want to have to call the number and get routed to 3 different robots, machines, before he gets to talk to a person, because that is very frustrating. Don't know if you've ever had to do that. Probably have. So Robert wrote, Orbitz handles hotel bookings for Southwest, terrible customer service. And Southwest, even though this is an Orbitz issue, Southwest still responded because he posted it on Southwest's page. So great back and forth here, really trying to help Robert resolve his issue. Even though it's technically an Orbitz issue, Southwest does host their software on their site, is what they're explaining here. So really making an effort twice here to get that issue resolved. I love this example. All right, let's move on to another poll question, as I mentioned before. The next item here, we're going to talk about addressing those issues, sort of as we saw an example here, addressing those issues right there on the platform where they were brought up. So where do customers reach out to you? Where do people want to get in touch with their feedback? Do they call you? Do they send an email? Do you have a customer support email? Do you have something at support@yourcompany.com or info@yourcompany.com where your customers and clients can reach out to you with their problems, concerns, questions, praises, good wishes, wedding invitations, delivery orders? Where do they reach out to you? And feel free to put these in as we go through. Again, you don't need to, we won't necessarily wait and hold on the screen, but feel free to answer that as we go, and we can come back to the question. And this is not just something for our poll today. These questions that I'm asking are really key questions that you need to think about and share with your team as you're developing your great social media customer service. So you really need to think about, whether you answer it here or not, where are customers trying to get a hold of me? And what am I doing to meet them where they are? Let's take a look at a couple of examples here. Here's one, and so I love pointing to Southwest. I love pointing to Starbucks. Also have great customer service, whether or not you actually buy the coffee. The customer service you can't deny is really good, especially on social media. Part of what they're known for. So here's an example. Kathy, this is on Twitter, by the way. The last couple of examples were on Facebook. So on Twitter here, Kathy says, the Avon, Ohio location is out of cold brew. It's only 1 p.m. She has a couple of hashtags. Bummer, Starbucks, sad. And Starbucks wrote back. So if you're relatively new to Twitter, when you mention somebody's username, you can see this mention here at Starbucks. When you mention somebody's username, that user got a notification that they were mentioned. And so Starbucks got a notification from Kathy. Starbucks probably has a dozen, or I don't know how they've structured their customer service team, but they probably have a dozen or more people answering these questions. But they got a ping, a notification saying that Kathy had a response here. And of course, I'm sure Starbucks, being the global corporation that they are, probably going through and analyzing which ones need responses. And they decided to respond to Kathy's, and they said, sorry about that, Kathy. Where is your Starbucks located? Please tell us your city. We'll look into this. And actually, Kathy did mention the city, Avon, Ohio, but she repeated it, which is nice. She spelled out Ohio there and said, thank you. So appreciated that service. So what I'm pointing out about this, about the idea of addressing issues where they happen, is that Starbucks didn't supply a phone number. They didn't supply a website. They didn't supply some support email address. They're addressing this issue right here in Twitter. They're saying, tell me where the Starbucks is, and we will solve this problem for you. Not directing Kathy to some recorded message. So a great way, a great example of how you can address things right when they happen. And at the end, toward the end of our webinar today, I'll give you some tools, some resources that will help you find these types of responses better. So you can actually do this. You can put this into practice by responding right on the platform. I'll show you some tools for how to do that. Let me see, did I have another one? Oh, I think that was my only one. Okay, good. So finally, question 3. This will be our final poll, since I'm going to combine those 4 and 5 topics. But for topic number 3, poll number 3, what are you doing now to listen to those types of issues that we just saw before they become big blowups. What are you doing to find those little little issues, little concerns, and address them right away? Proactively hit them right when they happen, rather than waiting for them to become a huge issue. Waiting for, as you saw in that first example on Facebook, waiting hours for the plane to never take off, and then you have not only an unhappy passenger, but you have a whole plane full of unhappy people who are going on their devices, going on their phones, complaining on Facebook. I mean, we may have just caught that one person who was an early complainer, but if you'd let it fester, it could have turned into a much, much bigger issue. So what are you doing now to address those issues? Let me take a quick pause here. We had a comment from a viewer who has no sound. Hope there's a recording. Yes, we are recording this. Just a quick poll if you want to tweet in, and maybe this could just be Julio and Lynn. You've been joining us for a while. Make sure that we're still coming through loud and clear. It could be my connection. So just take a quick second here. Oh, Julio responded. Great. Okay. Fantastic. Thanks so much for that quick response. Okay, great. Fantastic, Mike. All right, great. So let's show you, unless now we're getting toward the end of our time here, and I want to make sure we cover those last two bullets. Let's go ahead and show some examples of the third bullet here, proactively reaching out to make sure these issues are resolved before they become big. And again, I've got some examples here from Starbucks, because always a great example to turn to. The difference between these tweets and the tweet that we saw before is there is no mention. There is no mention here up at the top, let me show you, of the Starbucks username. I'll just use my handy dandy annotation tool. Take a look at this. That's just the word Starbucks. Starbucks received no notification that Suzanne tweeted this. Suzanne said, I just had my first blonde rose from Starbucks. Ooh, back to the dark side. So she was not happy with her drink order. So what Starbucks did is it set up listening tools to be able to find these, even though there was no notification from Twitter that this came through. And again, that's one of the things. I'll show you some great resources that we actually use at Splash Media U to find these exact kinds of customer issues, even if there's no notification, even if the user doesn't mention the brand name, which they did not do in this case. I mean, they said the brand name, but there's no @ mention of the username. So again, no direct notification. But again, Starbucks did a great job replying back. Did you try your blonde roast with milk and sugar, Suzanne? So a great example of finding that issue before it becomes bigger. And also a great example, not just of addressing an issue before it escalates, but also, not that this particular one would escalate, she just didn't happen to like that kind of coffee. She's still a Starbucks customer. But this is also a great example of, and I had something else in my mind, I just lost my train of thought. I love talking about these examples so much, and there's so many of these out there that I love being able to pull these and show these to you. And there's one other part of this that I wanted to illustrate, and I'll think of it in a second. But anyway, a great example of being able to listen and respond back and finding those key phrases and key words that people are talking about. And imagine if you could do this when people don't just use the name Starbucks. So first of all, they didn't use the username, they just typed Starbucks. But what if they didn't type Starbucks at all? What if they typed in Frappuccino? Now, as you probably know, there's only one brand. Some people use the word Frappuccino like they use the word Kleenex and rollerblades. They use it interchangeably for things that are similar. But there's only one brand that has Frappuccinos, that sells Frappuccinos. So what if they said, I just had a terrible Frappuccino instead and didn't even say Starbucks? Use those same resources to be able to find the conversations about your brand and reply. Anyway, so a great example of addressing the issue and responding right here on the platform itself, like we saw in the previous bullet as well. Let me go on to the next one here. And I know we're running out of time, and I want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions if you have them at the end. Here's an example. You remember our workflow had the comment comes in, and you send it this way if it's negative and this way if it's positive. So here's an example of the positive. And still seeing that tweet without any sort of notification from Twitter that Starbucks was mentioned. Because again, this is just text. This is not an @ mention. So there's no default notification, but Starbucks is still listening for that type of interaction and addressing it. And I love this response. Gary said, Actually, it's funny. I never noticed it. I didn't notice this until just now, but her name is Carrie. They could have done something with that too. But Carrie says, berry sangria herbal tea is what I live for. And Starbucks wrote back to say, it's safe to say you made a very good life decision. Partially chose this just because I'm a fan of puns myself. All right, so let's wrap it up with our last two points here. One was the ability by you to encourage that open communication. You can do great things like Facebook Live, which is now open to all businesses, and I hope you will play around with it if you haven't yet. But you can use any smart mobile device. Here, I don't know if you can still see my face, but you can use any smartphone now with Facebook on it to create a Q&A session right from your phone and be able to, and I would set a time, say on Wednesday at 12 Eastern, we're going to have a live Q&A with you, our customers. We want your feedback. So a live video session, tweet chats are a great way to encourage that kind of communication. If you're using Twitter for your business, just let your customers know we're going to use the hashtag, ABC Business Q&A or whatever your hashtag is going to be, kind of like ours, which is Splash Webinar today. So a tweet chat to remind customers that the communication lines are open, and then just traditional surveys. It looks like my connection is down. Attempting to reconnect. Uh-oh. Got a notification here. Sorry for the pause there. It looks like our connection was down for a second. I believe we're reconnecting here. I'm going to go ahead and finish this portion just in case. I'm going to go ahead and finish this portion of the webinar just in case we are still live. But again, traditional surveys and comment cards are still a great way to go. It's a tried and true practice of getting feedback. It's not the same kind of blind feedback as you saw in our Starbucks example, but it is still a great way to receive feedback and encourage that communication. Just, if nothing else, just to prove that your communication lines are open. Just even if you have the survey and a particular customer doesn't choose to take it, just a great way to encourage the communication and remind them that they're able to do so. And finally, how can great customer service and addressing these issues? It looks like we are reconnected. Thanks for your patience. Looks like we're reconnected here. I'm going to back up just briefly to this previous slide in case you missed it. But we are still recording the presentation, so it'll be there on the recording. So the previous slide that we just disconnected on for some reason, we were talking about Facebook Live, tweet chats, even traditional surveys and comment cards. If nothing else, my last point was, if nothing else, these are ways to remind customers that you're still open for business and open to their feedback and communication. Finally, what are some ways that this open communication and addressing these issues can improve your business? What is the ROI, in other words, of addressing these customer service issues? Well, one that we talked about already was that these are public conversations in the case of social media. And if you can address them publicly, it gives prospective customers and current customers the opportunity to see how great your customer service is and the kind of service that you offer. Pardon me. So keeping those conversations public are a great way to do that. And I mentioned that we have several tools that we use here at Splash Media U to improve the efficiency of our customer service and be able to find those conversations when people talk about us, even if they don't mention us by name, as you saw in my Starbucks example. One of those is our service portal, and there are a lot of those out there. The one we use is Zendesk, just an example of a customer service portal that allows your customers to log in and you can route your issues all through one platform. You can even set it up, it's an open API. You can even use the Zendesk API and plug it in to different platforms. So you can address it through email, through your sales channels, through a variety of other apps, so you can keep everything all in one place. And one example of those is Hootsuite, our third bullet here. Hootsuite is a social media dashboard where you can publish and listen for exactly those types of comments that we saw in the Starbucks example, when people don't necessarily mention your username, but they are saying your company name or even your products and services, and you want to respond, but they don't say your company name at all. Hootsuite is a great example of that. And the reason I connected it to Zendesk was because it is also one of those platforms that you can import Zendesk and route all of your customer service issues through the dashboard as well. I'm getting a little technical there at the end. If you're not using these two platforms or not using a platform for either service or publishing at all, please let us know after the fact. I'd love to help offer some guidance as you choose those, because it's very important for your efficiency and probably your sanity as well to be able to have some of these resources and tools at your disposal to use to make everything that you do in marketing more efficient. So feel free to ask me those questions. You can tweet me, speaking of Twitter, at Duncan Gilman. You can tweet us, of course, at Splash Media U, and Julio is monitoring that, and we'll be happy to respond. We have some great resources on our blog as well. We have blog posts from guest writers. Some of our students contribute content, which is great. We also put on that same blog episodes of our podcast. And if you're not familiar, our podcast for Splash Media U, or produced by Splash Media U, is called Social Currency. And I'll go ahead and type it in the chat box here so you can find it on iTunes. You can subscribe on iTunes wherever you subscribe to your, probably wherever you subscribe to your podcast, because we have an RSS feed for it.